Hello to all my dear followers. I'd like to welcome you to a new chapter of What if Naruto trains to become a Genjutsu master alongside Kurenai? At the top right of the screen, I've left a card with a playlist showing all the chapters of this fanfic in order. Please, I ask for your likes and comments so I can bring you more chapters. Without further ado, enjoy.
Naruto's eyes shone with a bright fire as he looked at the history book sitting in front of him on the table in his apartment. He couldn't wait to read about his family. He closed his eyes as he thought back to the tears he had shed after Shikamaru had left. He had wanted to know about his parents for so long that he had cried when he finally found a link to them. An actual point that showed that his name was not just something given to him, but that it meant something. This was a dream come true. His eyes watered again as he thought of opening this book after his almost mad dash home from the training field. He had decided to learn about his family first, and he would read the training manual next, followed by the Genjutsu book. Surprisingly, he had come up with a plan for which books to read as opposed to simply grabbing a book and reading it whenever he felt like it. He thought that if he was going to train by himself, he should set a pace for himself as he had seen ninja do when he had come across them at their training grounds and like what Kakashi would do during team exercises. So here Naruto sat, almost bouncing in his seat from the excitement of what he was about to learn. He smiled brightly and opened the book again, throwing his carefully laid plan of methodically flipping each page of the book slowly to gain a glimpse of what was inside away. Naruto almost immediately began to frantically search each page as he flipped through them as fast as he possibly could to find any page with the name Uzumaki on it. Senju clan fights Uchiha clan. Nope. Naruto thought to himself as he saw a picture of the first Hokage along with Madara Uchiha. Battle at the Valley of the End. Interesting. Didn't know the QB was used, but it's so boring. Despite his curiosity for information on the QB, his ancestry took precedence, and that particular passage of Uchiha Madara and Senju Hashirama fighting was not interesting enough to distract him from his goal. Ambush on Senju Tobarama by Ginkaku and Kinkaku. Sacred items? Bah, he thought. Oh, the old man sure beat those guys good in 2 different wars. Naruto smiled as he thought of how kick-ass his GG was. Even the normal thoughts of betrayal that followed his GG were absent as he smiled happily. Yondaime-sama. Naruto's thoughts ground to a halt as he beheld the back of his idol atop a red-skinned toad. He could see the QB thrashing around away from the point of view of the picture. He frowned as he ran his hand over the picture. "Why me?" he questioned. A question that had plagued him since he discovered his burden. He sat there for a few moments, almost as if expecting an answer to come jumping out from the page. He shook his head and continued flipping the pages rapidly. Naruto frowned a few minutes later when he was reaching the end of the book. He hadn't seen a single mention of Uzumaki within the text. Shikamaru couldn't have been lying, could he? Naruto shook his head and started to reach the last few pages within the book. His eyes narrowed and his searching increased until he pulled on one of the last pages and his eyes suddenly honed in on his family name. Uzumaki, 473 to 500 inch, he thought to himself as he read the short sentence. What the hell does that mean? He shouted to himself. Naruto was frustrated. Understandably so, as he was so close to an answer he sought for most of his life. So, when he found the passage that Shikamaru had talked about, he did not expect it to simply be a set of numbers. He growled to himself and let his mind wander through a few pranks he could set up on Shikamaru when a thought crossed his mind. Page numbers? He questioned as he looked down at the page this passage was on. His sweat dropped when seeing that he was on the 800th page. So, pages 473 to 500 contain my name? He questioned again before turning the pages, and, just when he stopped on 473, there it was in small print, Village of Uzumaki and its relation to Konoha. Naruto's excitement shot back up as he began to read the passage. Uzumaki was established shortly after all of the major countries had their own hidden villages. However, it never amounted to such a size that it could claim it was as strong as any of its predecessors. Despite this fact, it was a formidable village all on its own, almost capable of matching any of the 5 major countries in a war. The reason for this could come from almost any of their Jounin-level ninja that seemed to be able to use some form of jutsu as yet unrevealed to the world. Even its allies were never informed of this jutsu's mechanics. Uzumaki was a close ally to Konoha from the time it was formed until its destruction almost 15 years ago. The main reason for this was the fact that Uchiha's Uzumaki clan, which was the most prominent, was loosely related to Konoha's own Senju clan. Though this was never confirmed, there had been no other reason offered for the alliance and no declarations of denial from either clan when said claim would be presented. The Uzumaki clan was well known throughout the shinobi world. Their bloodline was one of the most versatile and most diverse type one could find within our countries. There seemed to be 3 different types of bloodline within the Uzumaki clan. The first would be a chakra bloodline that was also the rarest. With this chakra, one could have more potency or could have an easier flowing chakra within their pathways, both making for excellent ninjutsu experts. Even rarer still was an ability that would allow one to manifest weapons through their chakra alone. This last type was so rare, only 2 people were ever recorded as having it and neither had ever left an opponent alive after combat while using their bloodline, such was their secrecy. The second type, which was less rare but still incredibly useful, was a sensor bloodline. This gave the Uzumaki an ability that would later make them famous for their incredible tracking or combat abilities. Not much is known about the mechanics of this ability, but it was assumed that the better the control one had was the better their sensor ability was should the Uzumaki own this bloodline. Though there were cases where the Uzumaki had limits within themselves, so there is a limit to how far one could sense a particular chakra. It was said that if one had a strong enough sensor bloodline, then one could fight on that 6th sense alone without the need for touch, hearing, or even sight during combat. The third type, which seemed to be active in any Uzumaki, was a body bloodline. This gave an Uzumaki increased regeneration from healing from wounds, most were given excessive chakra pools, and a longer life than most that gave their village its nickname, the Village of Longevity. Most Uzumaki had 2 of these bloodlines to some degree, but there were cases where only one type of bloodline was active within an Uzumaki. If there was ever an Uzumaki with all 3 types, they never allowed that secret to pass from their walls. All of these bloodlines in combination with their special type of jutsu led to their downfall. The fear of Uchiha's alliance with Konoha sparked a preemptive strike before the Third Great Shinobi War. The combined forces of Kirigakure and Iwagakure attacked Uchiha in the middle of the night and destroyed the village, scattering the Uzumakis across the world. Only Kami knows what has befallen the last of this feared and respected clan. Naruto sat back and closed his eyes as he cried for his fallen clan. He was incredibly proud that his clan had been one of the most feared within the world. The fact that Uzumaki would strike so much fear as to warrant a preemptive strike from, not 1 but 2 of the 5 major counters spoke highly of their combat abilities. He smiled brightly as he promised himself, "The Uzumaki will rise again. My clan will not burn out from this. I will carry on our legacy," he thought to himself. After he had calmed down and read the passage once again, Naruto thought of the bloodlines the book said his clan possessed. He decided that he would work on his chakra control to see if he was a sensor. He already had plenty of chakra and he knew he healed fast, so he needed to learn if he had one of the other types. He decided that there really was no way of telling if his chakra was special because of Kyubi. Besides, he faintly remembered Irika once said that Genjutsu required chakra control to work properly. So, it would be a 2 birds 1 stone type of deal where he learns about his bloodline while working towards his goal of being a Genjutsu master. He smiled foxily as he marked the page he had just read and closed the history book. Naruto reached over and grabbed the chakra control exercises and smiled. Shikamaru knew about his large reserves, so he was happy about the extra exercises this book might contain, especially since this would be training. He opened the book and began to read about chakra. Chakra is made up of 2 parts, spiritual and physical. He read, "The balance of these 2 parts determines how well a ninja uses his chakra. Using too much of one type of these would result in poor chakra usage and control." He frowned. The best way to balance these energies is through meditation. His frown turned into a grimace as he closed his eyes and imagined himself reaching for his chakra. His chakra was always easy to get. He had been the first of the kids in his class to access his own pool. He smiled as he felt the energy within him. He reached farther in and felt for the combination of physical and spiritual. As he did, he felt his chakra whirl around him. He ignored it and pushed on deeper into his chakra until he could see the vast lake as parts of physical and spiritual energy. His spiritual actually looked small. So, he withdrew and looked at the book again. Physical energy is increased when your body is fit and worked, while spiritual energy is expanded by knowledge and experience. It stated that was simple, all he had to do was train more. With his new food along with his determination, he would train even harder as he learned more from these books. To properly combine these elements, the best way to start would be by leaf attachment. Naruto smiled as he already knew this exercise. The book explained how it was done and Naruto reread it to make sure he was doing it right. He smiled and continued on. The next step is surface clinging. Naruto's eyes widened in shock. How could surface clinging help my chakra control? He asked. One would walk up to a surface that is jutting out of the ground, such as a wall or tree, and use chakra to stick to the surface much like one gets the leaf to stick to your body. Too much chakra will push a person away from the surface, whereas not enough will cause the person to unstick from the surface. The book informed. Naruto sighed as he scanned the pictures of the surface clinging. He saw one note on the pictures. Caution. Use running start when first attempting. It said. He scratched his head and jumped down from the table. He looked at his wall and began to run towards it. When he reached it, he channeled chakra to his feet and attempted to run up the side of the wall. Naruto took one step. He took another step. Naruto smiled. Then he took a third step and his foot slipped as he fell to the ground with a loud oomph. Before Naruto looked at his wall with determination. It was going to be a long night. Scene break. Time skip 2 weeks. Naruto sat on Team 7's bridge awaiting the other members of his team. He had decided to arrive early today so he could practice his other type of control exercise as he had finished surface clinging last night. It had taken him some time to get the correct amount of chakra down for his exercise. He had finally managed to reach his ceiling within his house. He had taken to putting a pillow underneath his wall when he was attempting to climb it. He was rather proud of himself in being able to master that control exercise, but he was making little headway in his self-made exercise of control. His surface clinging was completed but not mastered, so he was concentrating on his own practice as he took a small break before trying to master surface clinging, which required him to be able to fight and move around freely upon the surface for 1 hour. Naruto had arrived early to have some peace and quiet whilst he attempted his own chakra control exercise. As a result, he sat on the bridge with his eyes closed as he concentrated on feeling how his chakra flowed and how it reacted to his will. Now that he had finished the surface clinging method, he recognized how he kept the leaf stuck to his head rather easily. So, he took a deep breath and attempted his self-made exercise. With his eyes closed, Naruto began channeling chakra beneath where he had the leaf currently. Then, he slowly started to decrease the chakra that held the leaf where it was. He smiled as he felt the leaf begin moving slightly. He continued decreasing the chakra, feeling his excitement build, as he anticipated the success of his technique. Finally, Naruto felt his chakra leave the leaf and the leaf start to move down. Unfortunately, a slight breeze appeared and the leaf was gently swept from Naruto's forehead. Damn! He cursed as his eyes snapped open and he glared at the wind as if it had committed a great crime. Naruto's glare was cut short as a grunt combined with a muttering of "Dobe" alerted him to the presence of his teammates having arrived when he had been concentrating. Naruto's bright blue orbs seemed to dim almost as if someone had turned the lights off within him as he greeted his teammates. "Sakura? Sasuke?" he said in a normal tone, causing a frown to appear on Sakura's face, along with a twitch of Sasuke's lips that hinted towards a downward direction. Sasuke nodded towards Naruto before leaning against the railing of the bridge. He was actually happy when Naruto had shown the emotion he normally did before those odd days 2 weeks ago. When he had heard Naruto curse, he had actually looked up in the hopes that Naruto might have returned to his old self and the past few weeks were just an act he had put on. Sasuke realized that, since Naruto had turned into something normal, Naruto had played a big part in keeping Sasuke from wallowing in self-pity. He had noticed that, without Naruto's loud exuberant yelling and attempts to beat him, Sasuke was slowly starting to brood more and more on the death of his clan. Sasuke didn't like that as it took away from his training. There was one other thing that Sasuke realized but didn't want to admit. He had enjoyed Naruto's attempts against him as he viewed him as a rival. As a result of that, he viewed him as something of a close friend to a brother. When Itachi had been around in Sasuke's youth, he had always been a rival and a person to overcome. That had carried over to Naruto when he had started to proclaim to be his rival. Despite Naruto never beating Sasuke, Sasuke had still seen and heard every one of Naruto's challenges. Even if Sasuke never acknowledged it, Naruto was the closest thing he would ever have to a friend up to this point. Sakura, on the other hand, frowned as she looked at Naruto with a somewhat hurt expression. "Why doesn't he call me Sakura-chan anymore?" was the prominent question on her mind. She watched as Naruto closed his eyes again and put a leaf on his head to continue whatever training he had been doing before she and Sasuke had arrived. She didn't like this new Naruto. He was cold to his team and way too quiet. She would never have guessed that Naruto could ever be like this, almost as if he were an actual ninja. She had, initially, been very happy with Naruto's new attitude. He had stopped asking her for dates and had stopped proclaiming every day that he would be Hokage. He had even stopped calling her Sakura-chan and making outbursts in the missions room when they would pick up their missions from Chunins. Their teamwork had even increased because she and Sasuke had not been as annoyed with Naruto's constant whining or loud exclamations, and the missions had been getting completed in almost half their previous times. Now, however, Sakura found this Naruto unnerving and completely alien to her. It didn't help that he would never look at her with that usual rational look he had throughout the academy. Sakura found herself even not asking Sasuke for dates anymore because, without Naruto's immediate attempt to ask her on a date after his rejection of her, she felt unwanted and ugly. Sakura had always been insecure about her forehead, and she knew she wasn't the best-looking girl in the class, but Naruto's constant pursuit of her had boosted her confidence. With that boost gone, she no longer felt comfortable going after the best-looking guy in their generation anymore. Despite this, her crush was still going strong, albeit in a softer, more quiet way. Naruto himself was oblivious to his teammates' distress concerning his new attitude. Oh, he knew that it had affected them and that they had changed as a result, but he no longer spent the time with them outside of missions he had initially tried to acquire. Before, he had stayed as late as possible with the team and would constantly try to start a conversation with his teammates so as to learn anything about them. He would make up excuses to walk with Sasuke or Sakura back to their houses. Yes, even Sasuke, as he did feel a sort of kinship with the last Uchiha. And, even though the two had never spoken a word whenever Naruto would walk them home, Naruto was happy to be in their presence even a minute longer than was necessary. He would even show up early on some mornings so as to sit with his teammates for as long as possible before Kakashi would show up. All in all, Naruto had been like an annoying pest, and it felt like they had finally squished him when they noticed that they missed his usual presence. Now, Naruto left right after Kakashi dismissed them. Most of the time, he would arrive late in the mornings, and often he would join them on the bridge only minutes before Kakashi, so Sasuke and Sakura could never get time to talk to Naruto. This, however, was never reflected on their teamwork. It was near flawless at this point. They held nearly all of the records for the damnable D-rank missions. The main reason for this was that there was no more bickering between the team. Since Naruto no longer questioned each and every order, the missions went much smoother. On top of this, when one of his teammates would make orders in the field, Naruto was usually the first to respond, and, if ever any were directed straight at him, the blonde boy had no hesitation upon carrying out their orders. Kakashi himself had praised their teamwork, though he still had yet to teach the team anything beyond teamwork exercises. In Naruto's mind, he replayed those missions and grimaced. Sure, he listened to their orders even if they sounded completely horrible, because he knew that cooperating with them was his best chance at a workable team. He swallowed his pride and his questions, while simultaneously carrying out their orders to avoid their berating him. Should they try, they would only have themselves to blame. This was Naruto's mindset while working with his teammates. Simply follow orders and work as a unit with your team so as to complete your mission. Really, this was influenced by the ninja rules book Shikamaru had given him, and he had adapted it to suit his purposes. Naruto had to occasionally squash his loud side with a firm lock of willpower, but otherwise the team was the epitome of what a genin team from Konoha should look like on paper. In their own personal lives, that couldn't be farther from the truth. Scene break. About 2 hours later, Naruto was sitting with the leaf on his head and concentrating so hard on his chakra that the world seemed to almost be a blur around him. Naruto closed his eyes and breathed in deeply before sending his chakra out. Okay, I tried slowly letting the leaf fall, but that doesn't work. It leaves it too open to the or other stuff. Naruto thought to himself, so, how do I get it to move while staying attached to me? He asked himself. Still with his eyes closed, Naruto's mind wandered around throwing random thoughts and ideas into his head, and each being summarily thrown back out as Naruto's creative mind overused its figurative juices. Without noticing, Naruto's concentration on the leaf wavered and Naruto's mind was suddenly assaulted with an influx of information that caused Naruto to open his eyes and start to pant as he clutched at his head. Sakura looked up at Naruto as he acted as if he had a straining headache. She was still hesitant to approach him, but he was her teammate, right? So, she stepped closer, unaware that Sasuke was watching, and asked quietly, "You okay, Naruto?" Naruto's blue eyes snapped to hers. He had not expected her to show kindness to him. As his mind reeled with the information he had just gained, and from the unexpected turn of events his face twisted into his overused smile, as a very small spark of warmth shone in his eyes before they squinted as he replied, "I'm fine, Sakura. Thank you." Sakura looked at him worriedly for another moment before nodding and scampering off towards Sasuke again. Sasuke himself had noticed Naruto's change again, and wondered why it was he had answered her normally instead of how he had been recently. Naruto closed his eyes again and he thought to himself, what the F was that? Living in the slums and not having parents led to Naruto having quite the vocabulary if he were so inclined. Today was one of those days. What the hell happened? I was concentrating on the leaf when I suddenly saw other people around me without my eyes. No, I sensed them. Naruto's eyes almost snapped open, but the smile that lit up Naruto's face was the first true one since Kurenai had received one. I'm a sensor, he thought with pride as he felt himself slipping into his receptive state again. Naruto could feel the chakras around him. There's Sakura and Sasuke. Both of them seemed kinda confused. Wait, what? He thought to himself, how could he tell they were confused? He felt their chakra pulsed and he chalked it up to his sensing the disruption in their chakra. Let's see. The next closest is, he trailed off as he expanded his search, attempting to train his bloodline to reach more than a few feet. He knew he would need some serious training and meditation to use this in combat, but for now he was going to bask in knowing he had 2 of the 3 types of the Uzumaki bloodline. Naruto's eyes snapped open as he looked over the bridge's edge, drawing looks of confusion from his teammates before Naruto called out, Kakashi-sensei, come out here. His team's eyes widened as Naruto's senses rang true and Kakashi appeared on the bridge behind Naruto. Naruto almost thought that he had mistaken a chakra signature from another person with Kakashi since he was not under the bridge like he had sensed him. However, when Naruto closed his eyes, he could sense that the signature under the bridge had disappeared. He grinned foxily as he opened his eyes again and looked at his sensei's narrowed eye. Kakashi was impressed with the blonde. Kakashi was a master of stealth almost as good as Jiraiya himself. For Naruto to have sensed him, especially since he had never shown any signs of having that bloodline until today, was absolutely astonishing. Granted, Kakashi had not been using his full ability as he was in friendly territory and he was only trying to hide from Chunin-level opponents. That still meant Naruto could, given time and concentration, sense people with Chunin-level ability and stealth. Kakashi would have to ask the Sandaime for some of Kushina's old scrolls. She had never been a censor, but she did have copies of most of the Uzumaki scrolls. Unfortunately, Kakashi was unable to tell Naruto that his ability was a bloodline and he couldn't reveal his heritage, so he would have to pass the lectures off as private training made special for Jinchuriki or something along those lines to get Naruto to fall for it. Kakashi's narrowed eye suddenly lost its edge as he smiled at Naruto. Good job, Naruto. How did you know I was there? He asked curiously, trying to figure out how Naruto knew to sense people's chakra signatures. A rare ability even before the last war and even more so in the present. It was possible to train for such a thing, but that training paled in comparison with the actual ability. Where one trained in this ability might be able to find a Jounin with some difficulty and Chunin with some hard work, Genin or civilians were out of their reach as their chakra pool was too small. As a result, any ninja capable of hiding their chakra signature would be able to, rather easily, evade someone trained in chakra detection. Naruto's ability, on the other hand, was pure and raw talent. He could sense even the rodents in the ground with enough work put into training him. Kakashi himself was trained in chakra detection, and he had always envied others who had the ability to sense chakra on the scale Naruto would be able to. That didn't mean he was going to hinder Naruto. Actually, he was excited to have a sensor on his team. It would make Naruto much more deadly, especially with his stealth. A shiver went up Kakashi's spine as he imagined Naruto in an assassin uniform. Naruto just smiled foxily as he said, "I was just sitting here when I felt you, Sasuke's and Sakura's chakra." He explained, "I didn't know what it was at first, since it was so weird, almost like seeing in a whole nother color. Like everything was gray with dots of blue for chakra." Kakashi nodded. That sounded right. His sensor world would define itself as he trained it. Kakashi suspected that Naruto had just come across his bloodline, as opposed to seeking help from someone else to train him without his knowledge or somehow having training that he had missed, and decided he would simply congratulate Naruto on his discovery. "Congratulations, Naruto, it seems you are a chakra sensor, a rare aspect these days," he said with his traditional eye smile. Sasuke's eyes widened as Sakura's jaw dropped, and she looked between her sensei and Naruto with an expression resembling a fish. "The dobe is a sensor?" Sasuke ground out, jealous of such a potentially powerful weapon. The Uchiha clan scrolls had mentioned sensors many times, and they all came with the same warning. Do not attempt to fight unless assured victory. Should the opponent be skilled with their sensor ability, it would be easy for any sensor to track the Sharingan with their ability. Though this was not one of the most dangerous threats Sasuke had come across, it was the most consistent one. Every time a sensor was mentioned, the warning was present. That alone put Sasuke on edge around his already unpredictable teammate. Sakura, ever the bookworm, knew exactly what a sensor entailed. As a result, she was just as shocked as Sasuke, while not for the same reason. She knew that having a sensor on their team would catapult their abilities, especially Naruto's. A sensor was very rare, and she could honestly say that this development was not unwanted. She, surprisingly, liked the idea of having a sensor on the team, even if it wasn't Sasuke. So, she simply settled for looking at Naruto in slight amazement as Naruto rubbed his head sheepishly like he used to. Naruto was slightly abashed as Kakashi actually complimented him. He grinned foxily as he rubbed his head in embarrassment. As a result of all of this, the only person who heard Sasuke was Kakashi. Kakashi's eye narrowed slightly, but he simply decided he would have to pay a little closer attention to the Uchiha. After all, Obito's legacy couldn't be allowed to be left behind of his senseis. Kakashi clapped his hands and brought the attention back to himself. "Okay then, my cute little genin," he said, drawing a glare from Sasuke and a slight one from Sakura. "We should go get our mission for the day." He turned around and whipped his little orange book out as he headed to the Hokage Tower with two disgruntled genin and a slightly happy one. Scene break. Naruto was walking with a slight grin as he followed his sensei, basking in the glow of his accomplishment on top of Kakashi's slight praise. As a result of all of his elation, he paid no heed to the glares directed at him. Naruto was still grinning goofily when he thought it might be a good time to ask Kakashi for help. Naruto turned to Kakashi and sped up to draw next to him. Just as Naruto opened his mouth though, Sasuke spoke from Kakashi's other side, alerting Naruto to the fact that Sasuke had somehow managed to come up here with him and they had left Sakura behind them. He glanced back to see that Sakura didn't seem too happy about being left behind. He quashed the urge to go offer his apology as he turned back to Kakashi and Sasuke's conversation. "Kakashi," Sasuke started only to be stopped by a raised hand from the silver-haired man. "I know what you're going to ask already, Sasuke-kun, and it is not possible to become a censor. One must be born with it," Kakashi stated as his nose was still buried in his book while simultaneously sidestepping a person who was about to knock into him. Sasuke scowled. "I wasn't going to ask that," he said like a petulant child, which Naruto noticed he almost looked like. He had to stifle a chuckle at the thought. "I knew there wasn't another way to become a censor. The Uchiha scrolls mention censors abundantly," he stated arrogantly. Kakashi's eyebrow raised. He suspected he already knew what Sasuke was going to ask. "I was going to ask, is there another way to sense chakra without having the sensor ability?" he stated, drawing a surprised look from Naruto and a sigh from Kakashi. "Yes, it is possible," he stated, drawing another surprised look from Naruto and a hungry gleam to appear in Sasuke's eyes. "However, it is nowhere near as powerful as Naruto's capability." he said, causing Sasuke's spark to dim a bit. It is called chakra detection, and it takes intense training to be able to utilize it in any form during combat. Like I said before, it is nowhere near as strong as Naruto's, but it is still useful. I use it all the time, he claimed. Sasuke's eyes were full of an eagerness to learn this technique, as Naruto felt a bit let down that his ability was able to be copied, even if only on a scale that was like him compared to Kakashi. However, it did occur to Naruto that if Kakashi could do this chakra detection thing, then he would be able to help him train his sensor. Again, he opened his mouth to voice his question when Kakashi spoke. I could teach it to you, Sasuke, he offered. Sasuke's answer was his usual grunt as he turned away from Kakashi and dropped back a few steps. Naruto's happiness evaporated almost as fast as it had appeared, and he looked straight ahead as he spoke to his sensei in a normal voice. What about me, Kakashi-sensei? He asked. Kakashi looked down at his other student and almost did a double take as he sensed Naruto was not too happy. But he responded truthfully, I'm sorry, Naruto, but seeing as I am not a censor, I can't really help you too well. I would just say follow your instincts and keep working on the basics. It'll come to you naturally just like it did on the bridge. He offered an eye smile, but when Naruto didn't even turn to answer him, he let out a low sigh. Strike two, Kakashi. He thought to himself. Naruto's eyes returned to their ice blue. He had allowed his mask to drop for the last time. Why do I keep letting them hurt me? He asked himself. A dark voice whispered in the back of his mind, seemingly too quiet for Naruto to make out what it was saying, and Naruto looked around hesitantly before shrugging it off as a figment of his imagination. He resolved that, no matter what happened, they would see nothing but Ninja Naruto from now on. Scene break. Naruto frowned as he walked away from the mission debriefing. Oddly enough, they had never debriefed straight to the Hokage yet. Naruto had read that missions should be reported to the Kage of your village, but these menial chores didn't seem like real missions to Naruto anyways, so he shrugged off the odd coincidence. After all, he really didn't want to see his Gigi right now anyways. He was still coming to terms with the fact he had lied to him his entire life. Though he no longer trusted the old man, he still held him in high regard and as a close personal friend, despite his actions. The mission debriefing, nor the mission actually, was what had Naruto in a foul mood. No, it was his team. Sakura looked like he could begin to build a teammate relation with after his revelation as a censor. Her concern for his health earlier this morning, combined with how she no longer attacked him for the slightest thing, though that may be because he doesn't really talk anymore, were quickly endearing her to Naruto. After all, despite what he might have decided upon, he knew he needed to have some type of relationship with his team, and honestly wanted more than just that, as he had always hoped for more when he had been younger. Even though he would no longer go to the lengths to prove he was worth their time, Naruto did want to have a cordial team, so as to say that he had more friends. This may have been contradictory, but Naruto now knew he would always welcome more friends, and he felt, if Sakura and Sasuke changed, he could actually have a relationship with them beyond their current one. He wouldn't push for their friendship, but neither would he deny them a chance to build such a relation, should they show the proper effort after everything they had done to estrange him. He noticed he was reaching the training grounds and headed to Training Ground 7. Sakura was well on the way to doing that. Sasuke, on the other hand, had only seemed to draw further in upon himself when he found out about Naruto's censor ability. He seemed almost jealous of Naruto's ability, and anytime Naruto closed his eyes, he would narrow a gaze that Naruto could feel was boring a hole in his head. Naruto disliked Sasuke's deep stares and, even after only one mission, resolved that he would have to see if he could do something about that if it continued. Naruto stopped and sighed as he looked at the monument stone. His eyes started to burn with the flames of determination. All right, I have my control to where I can sense now. So, I should start on the next control once I master this one, and I can start reading that Genjutsu book Shikamaru gave me. Naruto thought to himself as he smiled slightly at finally getting to read about his, now chosen, field of expertise. He couldn't wait to show Kurenai what he might make. The thought made him grin foxily as his mind went into overdrive, thinking of the many things from his pranks that he could use within an illusion. When he started to rub his hands together, he suddenly sweat dropped as he thought to himself, "What am I doing?" Naruto looked thoughtful for a moment before shrugging it off and closing his eyes, expanding his sensor ability to sense any nearby people. Though he could only sense a few yards, he figured that constantly training it, along with increasing his chakra control, would help increase his range. As his other senses fell away, Naruto was treated to his sensor Bison. He could feel the earth and the wildlife around him in varying degrees of gray, while his own chakra pool was a sort of center of the dome-like vision he obtained when he focused. When he sensed that no one was nearby, he opened his eyes and used his other senses to make sure that he hadn't missed anything before nodding to himself and entering the underbrush, heading to his training clearing. Scene break. Naruto smiled as he sat down in his training clearing and looked around. He had done some more surface clinging before doing some push-ups and sit-ups, while intermittently running laps around his clearing. He had read some of each of the books except the Genjutsu book. Once he had finished his training in control, he would sit down to read more of the books, as he realized it was easier to read the books when he was slightly tired, though it also had the effect of making him sleepy while reading. So, he had basic knowledge of each of the books, and the training one had helped immensely. After gaining weight from the heavy type of food the Akimichi restaurants would serve him, he had quickly burned any excess fat off when he stepped up his training regime according to the book How to Train. He had doubled his push-ups and sit-ups, as well as almost quadrupling the amount of laps he ran. At first, Naruto had been slightly disappointed with his progress, but as the weeks went by, he noticed that things that Naruto had trouble lifting or moving before were slowly becoming easier to handle. As such, Naruto was quite pleased with his progress, even if it was only slow and steady. He disliked having to wait for it, but he was trying his best to appreciate how much work he should put into being a ninja in order to become a ninja of the caliber that legends were made of. Naruto smiled and produced his Genjutsu book from his coat. He immediately set it down and opened the book, eager to find out its secrets, when he noticed a page had fallen from it. He blinked as he snatched the paper off of the ground and brought it up to his eyes. Dear Naruto, below is some words which I thought might help you understand the book better. Use them wisely. Subtlety, the art of stealth and covert ops. It is what you do when you hide. It is being able to blend into the background or being able to do something without being noticed. Finesse means you need to have a lot of skill. Something which you have in spades when you concentrate. Shikamaru. Naruto blinked before folding the paper up and putting it in his pocket. He was slightly happy and slightly angry. That Shikamaru might believe he wouldn't know what those words meant slightly hurt Naruto. Of course, that was dimmed by the fact Shikamaru cared enough to write out the definitions himself. After having read the first two definitions, Naruto had skipped to the end to see who it was. In hindsight, he should have known it was Shikamaru. Deciding to take his friend's concern as a blessing, he returned to his book and smiled as he started to flip through the beginning pages to get to the first chapter. Reading all those other books finally got him used to how teaching books were organized. He finally reached the first chapter and began to read, taking his first steps into the realm where reality and fiction blur together. Genjutsu, the art of illusions. This art of jutsu used by shinobi is one of the hardest to master, as it is difficult to gauge one's level. Often, one is only considered a master when said person is capable of defeating their own teacher in this art. Unlike ninjutsu or taijutsu, genjutsu is very versatile and only limited to the user's imagination and creativity. Whereas ninjutsu and taijutsu rely heavily on preset factors, namely the environment for ninjutsu and the shinobi's body for taijutsu, genjutsu relies heavily upon the user's mental finesse. Genjutsu masters are few and far in between, mainly for the difficulty and the necessary conditions that must be met in order to be capable of using genjutsu to its fullest extent. The biggest block for the aspiring genjutsu user is chakra control. Many people simply do not or cannot maintain the proper control that this art requires. This is because one must have almost perfect chakra control to be able to invade another's mental chakra pathways and implant their own chakra to activate their illusionary tactic. The best genjutsu users are often highly intelligent and capable of noticing even the slightest details in order to recognize when they are caught within genjutsu or for casting their own. Observation is another key element while casting a genjutsu. The more real the genjutsu is, the more likely one is to notice that they are caught within an illusion. For example, if one would cast a genjutsu on a person while in a clearing with trees, grass, and a single small rock on a person who is observant, and the user does not put the rock within the illusion, then the target would immediately notice that they were within an illusion. Remember, observation is key while creating an illusion concerning one's surroundings. There are 3 types of genjutsu known to the world. The first, and most widely used, are the illusionary tactics and abilities that genjutsu are known for. This type of jutsu is cast by invading another's mental chakra pathways and implanting your own to induce the illusion upon your enemy. Examples of these would be sensory jutsu, which confuse the senses into thinking something is there when it is not, environment jutsu, which change one's surroundings to cause one to panic or believe they have left the area of danger, or pain jutsu, which make you believe you have been hurt when your body has not been touched in reality. This type of jutsu is the most versatile while being restricted, versatile in that one can add or subtract from their image or senses, restricted in the fact that, should one change too much, it can be easily found out. The second type of genjutsu is a Dojutsu caste genjutsu. There are very few known Dojutsu genjutsu, but there are two deadly clans known for their proficiency in Dojutsu genjutsu. The first and lesser-known clan is the Kurama clan. Their Dojutsu has no specific shape or name and, as such, could be considered the deadlier of the two Dojutsu, as one could never tell if it was activated easily. This clan is known for its inner demons that are slowly killing their bloodline. The inner demon usually controls the Kurama's genjutsu ability and leads to a power struggle which the Kuramas are steadily starting to lose. As a result, this clan is slowly dying out. The second clan, and the most prominent, is the Uchiha clan. Their Jujutsu, the Sharingan, takes the form of a red scara with any number of 1 to 3 tomos in both eyes to show one's maturity within the clan's progression. Their Jujutsu allows the Uchihas to sense genjutsu easier, as it allows them the ability to see chakra when activated. In addition, the eyes themselves give the Uchiha the ability to cast genjutsu with mere eye contact with enough training. There is a rumored ability within the genjutsu world that another form of the Sharingan allows the user to use a genjutsu known as Tsukuyami, in which it is said that the user holds control over time and space. This ability has never been confirmed, but the abilities within the Sharingan eyes leads many genjutsu users to believe this tale. The final type of genjutsu, and the rarest, are genjutsu that actually affect the surrounding area. These genjutsu seem similar to ninjutsu, as they seem to attack the target's chakra network but attack any person within the range of the genjutsu. The only known technique of this type of genjutsu was used by the Shodame and Naidame Hokages of Konoha. The technique is known as Kokwanju no Jutsu, Journey into Black Darkness technique. All of these types of genjutsu make up the genjutsu field of expertise. Finally, there are 3 known ways to dispel a genjutsu. The first, and least recommended, is inflicting enough pain on yourself to break the control the chakra within your mental pathways has upon your mind. The second, and most widely used way, is to completely stop your flow of chakra and then release a large amount of chakra throughout your entire mind to disrupt the hold the opponent's chakra has upon you, then expelling it from your mind. Finally, one can have an outside source of chakra pulse their own chakra within your coils to expunge the opposing chakra from within your body. This concludes the first chapter of your lesson upon genjutsu. Naruto blinked as he read the first chapter and then pulled out the paper Shikamaru had written for him. "Thank you," he whispered as he held the paper like a lifeline. He hadn't understood half of the bigger words. Naruto suddenly looked up, quite perplexed as to how someone had managed to sneak up on him as he heard the bushes rustle. "Genjutsu-e?" "Naruto," the voice said. Naruto's eyes widened in shock. "Genjutsu-e?" "Naruto-san," the voice said from the bushes. Naruto's eyes were locked on the rustling before it stopped and out stepped a woman. "Kurenai-san," Naruto shouted as he got up and appeared next to her. She blinked as she looked down at his bright blue eyes. "How are you?" he asked loudly, excited to see his friend after so long. Kurenai smiled slightly. "I'm fine, and how about yourself?" she asked politely. Naruto grinned widely. "I got a new friend," he stated with his eyes sparkling like diamonds. Kurenai's returning smile seemed to widen. "And guess what?" he continued. "What?" Kurenai asked playfully, indulging his boisterous attitude for now. "He gave me books on how to train," he said with a huge smile on his face. His eyes squinted as his smile grew while he talked. "Shika really helped me out. These training books helped me change my training so I get more out of it. Did you know there were better ways of controlling your chakra than leaf clinging?" he asked. Kurenai's wine-red eyes narrowed slightly, though Naruto didn't catch it. "Yes, I did." "How did you learn of it?" she asked. "Did Kakashi teach it to you?" she assumed. All of a sudden, Naruto's boisterous attitude seemed to deflate at the mention of his sensei's name. His bright blue eyes seemed to dim and his shoulders slumped slightly. Small things that no one would notice if they were normal. Kurenai, on the other hand, is not normal. She is a jounin and she is known for her Genjutsu prowess. As such, she picked up on Naruto's body language, which basically said, "I don't like Kakashi." "No, Kakashi-sensei did not teach me this," he stated in a more somber voice, his tone suggesting that he didn't want to talk about it. Kurenai quickly changed the subject. "So, what books did Shika-san lend you?" she asked curiously as she looked at the Genjutsu book lying in the clearing, her mind churning ideas about what Kakashi could have done to warrant such a reaction in Naruto. Naruto's eyes brightened. "A few, but that is not the best part." He smiled again, though it held a hint of sadness. "He said I could keep them," Naruto stated gleefully. "How to train, shinobi rules, chakra control plus more for those with higher reserves, history of Konoha, and Genjutsu for beginners were the books he gave me," he said after seeing Kurenai try to look at the cover of his book when he didn't give names. Kurenai looked down at the Genjutsu book, seemingly in thought, as Naruto grinned at her. Naruto was enjoying being in her presence again. It made him feel much better being with his friend. He had eaten at Shikamaru's frequently, so he was used to Shikamaru's company, but he hadn't seen his first real friend since those days about 2 weeks ago. He had been worried she had been run off or that something might have happened to her. But she was here now, so he put those thoughts out of his head and focused on her. She was wearing her usual dress, the wrappings that looked more like medical tape than a dress, along with her red sleeve and ninja shoes. "Why history of Konoha?" she finally asked after she had been in thought. Naruto blinked before a grin that oddly reminded her of a Cheshire cat spread across his face. "Did you know there was a clan called Uzumaki?" he asked. Kurenai's eyes locked onto his own squinted ones as he grinned. His happiness was palpable as he continued talking about his family. They were one of the strongest clans, feared as much as any of the biggest one in Konoha. So feared, in fact, that Iwa and Kiri had to surprise attack them in order to take them out with their full forces before the start of the Third Shinobi War. He said, a hint of sadness creeping into his voice while pride took a much bigger part of it. Kurenai's eyes were locked onto his own with a seriousness that he had only seen when she had told him to come out, when she thought he had been spying on her. So, he continued, they were feared for 2 things. The first was some obscure jutsu that only their jounins knew how to use, he said, drawing a nod from Kurenai. The second was their bloodline, he said, causing Kurenai's usually unexpressive eyes to widen in shock. There were 3 types: body, which allowed for an impressive healing factor, excessive chakra pools, and a longer life than most. Naruto repeated almost word for word from the text, something he had memorized since it was the first indication of his family. The chakra, which was the rarest but also usually the most powerful as it allowed for easier casting of jutsu. The strongest could even make weapons out of their own chakra. Kurenai's eyes were back to their usual size as she took in all of Naruto's information. Finally, a sensor, which allows for one to sense others' chakra. If the bloodline was strong enough, it could allow the Uzumaki to fight without their sight and use only their sensor. Naruto finished with a prideful smile at knowing about his heritage as Kurenai's eyes rested on him with a thoughtful look. That's pretty impressive, Naruto-san. I'm surprised I never heard of them, Kurenai commented. Naruto beamed at the praise to his clan. The best part is that most Uzumaki unlocked 2 parts of the bloodline, so I can have 2 parts of it, he stated with a big smile on his face. And he paused for effect as he saw Kurenai lean forward slightly. I discovered I was a censor today, Kurenai, he shouted, his excitement making him forget to add on the honorific to her name. Kurenai's only response was a smile which caused Naruto's cheeks to burn red as he noticed how beautiful she looked while smiling a full-blown smile, and she spoke. That's amazing, Naruto, she said, dropping the honorific off of his own name. Naruto tried desperately to banish his blush, but she seemed to just giggle at his obvious attraction to her. Arigato, Kurenai, he stuttered out in response. An awkward pause followed as Naruto attempted to control his blush, and Kurenai just stood there seemingly slightly amused at his reaction to her, though it was not unexpected. So, how good are you? She asked curiously. I can only feel chakra while they are close right now, but it was suggested that increasing my control and practicing with it would increase my range, so don't worry. Soon, I will be able to feel everyone in Konoha, Naruto boasted slightly as he smiled, his blush having abated to just a pink tint on his cheeks. Kurenai chuckled slightly, You still never told me how you knew about the advanced chakra control techniques, she said as her eyes strayed to the Genjutsu book on the ground again. Naruto rubbed his head sheepishly as he smiled shyly. Shika gave me that chakra control book, remember? He said, which caused Kurenai to nod in admission that she had heard that. So you learned it from the book? She asked for clarification. Something in her tone seemed off to Naruto. His eyes looked towards her as he nodded in assent that he had, and saw her tense slightly as her hand clenched slightly. Something he had noticed she had done when the people had glared at him, so he assumed she was slightly angry. He couldn't think of anything that she would be angry about him learning from a book, but he shrugged it off as she looked at him. What have you learned from the chakra control book? She asked. Naruto smiled as he said, I sort of mastered surface clinging. I can walk up and down the wall in my apartment and walk across my ceiling, but I can't fight on it for an hour just yet. He explained. I wind up using too much chakra and pushing off the wall. Naruto's eyes widened as his problem with his self-made control technique was suddenly solved. He immediately jumped forward and grabbed a leaf up from the ground. He sat down on the ground and closed his eyes as he placed the leaf on his forehead and began to concentrate. Kurenai watched slightly stunned at what he had done, suddenly moving so fast she had trouble following him. When he settled, she noticed that his eyes were closed and a look of concentration had come across his face. She was slightly curious on what he was doing when she noticed the leaf on his forehead. Stick the leaf to your head with your chakra. Naruto thought to himself. He felt the leaf stick and a grin threatened to form, but he held it back as he wanted to see if his idea worked. Apply the same amount of chakra right underneath it to grab it. He concentrated on his chakra and willed it to follow his directions. His lips twitched when he felt his chakra stabilize. Now, slowly increase the chakra from the top of the leaf all the way down so it slowly pushes the leaf down my forehead to the tip of my nose, he thought as he applied what he had just realized. Naruto had discovered that he needed to force the leaf to move, not allow it to move around through some other method and randomly stick to himself again. So, he had taken what he learned through the surface clinging and applied it to his own training. Following the method of sticking the leaf to his forehead, then slowly pushing it down by increasing his chakra output to push the leaf down by not applying the chakra throughout the whole area the leaf was sticking but simply near the top. Naruto concentrated intensely as he felt the completion of his control exercise at hand. Slowly, ever so slowly, he felt the leaf begin its slow descent down his forehead. His lips formed a grin as he felt the leaf begin to slide past his eyelids. Once it reached the tip of his nose, he opened his eyes and the leaf floated away as he jumped up and yelled, Yay! I did it, I did it! Naruto was jumping around for a few minutes before Kurenai brought him back with a pointed cough. He chuckled sheepishly as he rubbed his head and bowed in apology. Excuse me, Kurenai. I got a little excited, he said. Kurenai grinned slightly. It's okay, Naruto. Though I am curious as to what you did, she asked with a curious look to him. Naruto smiled, happy to explain what he had come up with to his friend. Well, Kakashi-sensei kept telling me my chakra control needed to be improved, and I didn't know any other way to increase my control past the leaf clinging. He explained, drawing a look from Kurenai that seemed half confused and half displeased. He continued before she could speak, oblivious to how she had reacted. So, I decided to try to use it while we waited for Kakashi-sensei every day. He let out an exasperated sigh before speaking in a louder tone. But it was so boring, he exclaimed, drawing an amused expression from Kurenai. So, I tried to improve it. I came up with the idea of moving the leaf across my body with just my chakra. He finished. Kurenai's response was, How did you finish it? She asked. Naruto then proceeded to explain how he had started his exercise and through all his different attempts culminating in his success today. That is impressive, Naruto. You have made a complicated way of controlling your chakra when you add more leaves. She commented, Good job. Naruto blushed but responded, It's nothing. After all, I need good chakra control in order to be a Genjutsu master, right? He grinned cheekily. Kurenai's shocked expression couldn't be held from her face this time, and her voice spoke of it when she said, A Genjutsu master? Why would you want to become a Genjutsu master? She questioned. It wasn't that she doubted his determination. It was just that so few ever thought anything of Genjutsu, and she had been working hard ever since she became a jounin to prove the usefulness of Genjutsu. Naruto's normally exuberant eyes turned into an fiery blue that seemed to engulf Kurenai's own red eyes as he looked at her with total seriousness. I had wanted to be a ninjutsu specialist because Gigi had told me I would be perfect for it after I found out about. He trailed off as he clutched at his stomach. Kurenai nodded as he looked down for a second. "Kyubi?" he stated in a whisper. But Shika managed to talk me into thinking about Genjutsu as my specialty. He said that my creativity and unpredictable plans were perfect for a Genjutsu user and making Genjutsu. Kurenai nodded, agreeing with Shikamaru's assessment of Naruto. He also said that it was looked down upon branch and that no one ever really respected it, so I want to become a Genjutsu master and then Hokage so everyone sees how great Genjutsu is, he declared as his blue eyes seemed to have a fire burning in them. Kurenai smiled. Not one of those half smiles she had been favoring him with. Not even just a happy smile. No, this smile held an emotion Naruto couldn't quite place. It was odd. The feeling it induced in Naruto was one he had never felt before. He felt strong and his chest seemed to swell as he looked upon Kurenai's smile. The smile that, even if he couldn't recognize it, held pride for Naruto choosing such a difficult path. Though soon, Kurenai's smile faded to be set in a grim line upon her face. Naruto's determination seemed to falter slightly, but he looked at her as she opened her mouth to speak, sadness being reflected in her eyes. "I'm sorry to tell you this, Naruto, but..." Kurenai sighed and her eyes darted down before locking with Naruto's. "I don't think you could ever maintain the chakra control necessary to be a Genjutsu user," she said softly. Naruto's blue eyes almost seemed to break, but he looked down from Kurenai before she caught a good glimpse of them. "Why?" he asked quietly. Naruto felt his resolve weaken as his first friend expressed a lack of faith within him. He was hurt that she would believe that he couldn't become a Genjutsu master. It hurt terribly, but he had to know why. To top it off, she was a Genjutsu mistress, so she would know if he could become one, just as the book said. Naruto heard Kurenai sigh before shuffling slightly. "Kyubi and your massive chakra reserves make it difficult for you to control your chakra. That is why you can't do the Bunshin," Kurenai said. Naruto's eyes snapped to hers. "How do you know that?" he asked curiously. His head cocked to the side as he took in what she had said about his chakra pools, something he had known about. Kurenai frowned but responded, "All of the Jounin sensei were briefed about all of the graduates this year in case we had to teach you." Naruto nodded and looked back down. An awkward and heavy air settled in the clearing as Kurenai felt the weight of being a person to tell someone that their plans would not work. Naruto was in deep thought. "You said it was hard," he said softly, catching Kurenai's attention. Naruto looked up at Kurenai and his eyes were back to their fiery blues as he spoke. "Hard, but not impossible?" he questioned. Kurenai shifted again under his piercing gaze. "No, not impossible but dash." She attempted to continue before being cut off. "Then I will still do it," he stated as if he were already a master. His confident grin never wavered as he looked at Kurenai's stunned expression. "After all, they said that outrunning ANBU while in burnt orange was impossible, but I still did it," he said cheekily. Kurenai stared at him oddly for a few more minutes, his grin never wavering as she seemed to contemplate something, until she suddenly giggled behind her hand. Just as suddenly, she broke out into a fit of laughter, her melodious laughter washing over the clearing. Naruto's eyes closed as he listened and focused on how calming her laughter was, as it also seemed infectious as he felt his mood improve. Naruto's confident grin formed into a bright smile as he listened to his friend's laughter ring out and lighten his mood. His smile stretched across his face before he had even realized it as he opened his eyes again to see Kurenai's chest shaking with her laughter, drawing his attention to her breasts, but he quickly turned high attention to her face, knowing that Kurenai wouldn't like him staring, nor did he want her to think him a pervert. Finally, her laughter subsided as Naruto's eyes locked with her own closed ones before drifting down to her red lips. Naruto watched her mouth open and close as she gulped breath in after her explosive laughter. He smiled challengingly at her as she looked back down at him, wiping a tear from her eye. "Oh dear Naruto, you most certainly are the most unpredictable person I have ever met and the only one to ever make me laugh like that," she said as she favored him with a small smile. Naruto's challenging smile turned into another foxy grin. All right, if you want to be a master, who am I to tell one of the only ninja in all of Konoha who sees the use of Genjutsu as something worth it? No? She asked rhetorically, drawing a great big grin from Naruto. What has Kakashi taught you though? She asked. Naruto's eyes suddenly went cold again as she mentioned his sensei's name. About? He asked almost coldly. Kurenai's eyes widened slightly as her smile faded. Anything? She replied in her mission tone. Something that sent a shiver down Naruto's back. Teamwork exercises. Naruto answered. Kurenai waited a few more moments before it became clear that was all Naruto was going to say. Her eyes narrowed as she spoke. You mean to tell me that he has only trained you in teamwork exercises since he got you from the academy? She asked. Naruto nodded. No taijutsu, ninjutsu, no physical training, just teamwork? She asked again. Again, Naruto nodded. Kurenai's hand clenched again as Naruto watched her. Is that why you asked me to help you train when we first met? She asked quietly. Naruto looked down but nodded again, a bit embarrassed as she figured him out. Did you ever ask Kakashi for extra help? She asked curiously. He kept telling us that our teamwork needed to be improved before he would help us any more than teamwork exercises. Naruto said. Though Kurenai picked up on Naruto's body language as he said that, she could tell something else was bothering him. When he went to stop but she gave him a look that said to tell her everything, he continued. He kept to that until today when we found out I was a censor. When we were walking towards the Hokage Tower to accept our mission, Sasuke asked if he could be trained in something similar to censors. He said, Chakra detection. Kurenai supplied. Naruto nodded. Kakashi-sensei said that he was trained in it and that it was nowhere near as powerful as mine, but it was still useful and that he even used it. Here, Naruto's hand clenched. Before Sasuke could even ask, Kakashi offered to train him in it. Naruto said with a bit of resentment in his voice. Kurenai's eyes narrowed slightly. How did he expect your team to train without him teaching during these weeks? She asked. He mentioned trying the library, but I can't get in there. Naruto said sadly. A silence descended as Naruto looked at the ground, contemplating what he had just revealed, and Kurenai seemed to wage an internal war to anyone who watched her face. The silence stretched, seconds becoming minutes until a voice shattered the silence. Then it seems you are in need of a teacher, Naruto. Kurenai said a little formally. Naruto looked up at her. Yes, but I don't know who to ask. Kakashi-sensei won't help me. Iruka-sensei is busy with the academy, and Gigi is the Hokage. He can't always help me. Naruto said as he hung his head. You have your own team, Kurenai. I can't take their place. Kurenai smiled softly. No, you can't. Naruto's head dropped a bit more. But they are all from clans and none of them seem interested in Genjutsu. His head snapped to hers, hope in his eyes. I would enjoy teaching my art to an aspiring Genjutsu user. I can handle some extra training hours after my own teams. She said to him. That is, if you want. A slightly teasing tone making its way into her voice as she offered her services. Yes, he said as he jumped towards her and hugged her tightly. Thanks, Kurenai. I won't let you down. Kurenai just ruffled his hair a bit before a light pink dusted her cheeks from where his head was buried. Deciding that he didn't mean anything perverted by his actions, she felt the need to tease him a bit. You know? She started making his head tilt upwards so he was looking up at her through the valley of her breasts. I usually put anyone who touches me like this in a Genjutsu for perverts. She chuckled as Naruto suddenly jumped back and blushed as he looked down at the ground. Sorry, Kurenai. I got excited again, he said. Kurenai opened her mouth, a witty retort about the double meaning of his words on the tip of her tongue, when she realized what she was about to do and shook her head at herself. It's fine, Naruto. Just please do not make it a habit, she said. Naruto nodded. Now, I need to know all of your abilities so I can help you train. Could you please tell me what else you might know besides surface and leaf clinging? She asked. Naruto looked bright for a few seconds upon hearing the question until he suddenly hung his head and mumbled something Kurenai couldn't hear. Slightly taken aback at his response, she spoke up. What was that, Naruto? She asked. Naruto shook his head and looked back up at her. a hint of a smile on his face as he said, "Well, I can do Kawarimi and Henge pretty well, but Bunshin still escapes me. I guess you know why," he said as she nodded. "The only other thing I know besides the control technique is most of the shinobi rules and Kage Bunshin." He finished with a pained smile on his face. He knew that was painfully little, but it was all he managed to accumulate during his years of trying to train himself. He knew his taijutsu was horrible. He watched as Kurenai's face seemed to blank out and become thoughtful before she spoke in an almost detached tone. "I am sorry to be asking this again, Naruto, but Kakashi never taught you any taijutsu?" she asked. Naruto shook his head and Kurenai sighed as she shook her head. "I think we might need to go see Hokage-sama about this. What Kakashi is doing is not appropriate for training genin." Naruto cocked his head to the side in a curious expression as Kurenai looked down at him. "Why is that, Kurenai?" he asked. "Because with all of your D-rank missions, you should soon be heading out on C-rank missions with your team makeup. If he has not taught you anything yet, there is a high possibility of—" She trailed off as she didn't want to explain it to a new genin. "Death," Naruto stated, his eyes icy blue as he remembered one of the shinobi rules. "Never hesitate, for your enemies will not," he recited. He may be dense, but he quickly picked up the more morose parts of the job he had chosen. Though he was hesitant to take another's life, he had chosen his path and nothing would sway him. Kurenai looked down at Naruto with appraising eyes before nodding and continuing. "Dying? So I must inform the Hokage that your team will not be ready as soon as they should be. It is a duty any senpai has towards their kohai," she added. Naruto nodded. A comfortable silence fell as the two were wrapped in their own thoughts for a few minutes before Naruto spoke. "When do we start, Kurenai?" "Sensei?" he asked. Kurenai's wine-red eyes fell on his own bright blues and she grinned slightly. "Unfortunately, I can't really train you until your control comes up to an appropriate level, so we will have to concentrate on that. But it is important to train your body to be able to move away from your opponent as well as be capable of dodging projectiles while casting your Genjutsu." At Naruto's confused face, she elaborated, "Genjutsu is a mid-long range fighting style, Naruto. You cannot be right next to your opponent when trying to cast Genjutsu, or a wide variety of things could happen to disrupt your jutsu and allow your opponent the upper hand." Naruto nodded as he filed the information away. Kurenai watched until he looked back up at her and waited expectantly. She had done research on every genin just in case she was assigned any of them. She had found that Naruto would need a slower pace of lecturing, but the practical would be where he excelled. So, she took pauses as she began to explain to him the basics of his field. "First, go climb the tree while I am talking. This will help your observation skills along with your control skills," she explained. Naruto nodded and walked to a tree. He placed his foot upon the trunk and began walking up and down the tree as Kurenai sat on the ground and spoke. "The main advantage of Genjutsu is that one almost never realizes when they are in a Genjutsu until it is too late. If you manage to make your Genjutsu subtle enough, then you can even assassinate your opponent without them ever knowing you were there." A hint of pride colored her voice as she spoke of her field of expertise. "It is an art that relies heavily upon subtlety, finesse, and intelligence. As rare as it happens, when Genjutsu masters are facing off against each other on the battlefield, it is usually the more intelligent person who wins," Kurenai said as Naruto reached the top of the tree and headed back down. "There are very few Genjutsu users within Konoha," Kurenai said. "Who are famous for using Genjutsu?" Naruto interrupted a bit excitedly, almost making himself slip. Kurenai frowned, then smiled softly at his exuberance and replied, "Well, there is me," she said as Naruto nodded his head. "To be honest, I am the only jounin from Konoha that utilizes Genjutsu as a primary form of attack. Many ANBU and jounin use it with another branch to increase the effectiveness of their attacks, but only myself utilizes this particular branch as my main attack method," she admitted. Naruto was a bit shocked that there would only be one Genjutsu user within Konoha, but then he remembered something that the book had said about Genjutsu. "What about the Uchiha?" he asked. As he was facing away from her, he missed the look of annoyance flitter across her face. "Many of them were quite proficient in it, but none of them used it like I do." Kurenai fell silent, contemplating telling Naruto this next piece of information as he started to walk back down towards her again. The only Uchiha that used Genjutsu as a master would was Uchiha Itachi, Sasuke's older brother. Kurenai said as she looked up at Naruto, who was halfway down the tree. Naruto's concentration failed a moment as his mind blanked at that bit of information. Sasuke's brother had been hailed as one of the best ninja to come out of Konoha, rivaling even the Yondaime himself in terms of potential. Naruto had read about the famous ninja from Konoha in the history books, and he had marked Itachi as someone he would never want to fight. The sight of his picture alone had sent shivers down Naruto's spine. Oddly enough, no clear picture of the Yondaime had been present within the book, only an outline of him as he faced the rampaging Kyuubi. Kurenai stood ready to catch Naruto should he fall from the slightly shocking information. But she was surprised when he seemed to blank out for a few moments and simply remained rooted to the tree as he stood there. When his eyes became refocused and he continued his exercise as if he hadn't missed a beat, Kurenai was impressed. He was already well on his way of mastering this control. Restarting her lecture, "Because of this, I am going to drill you in different aspects of different areas at random times during our training to see how fast your mind can adapt to situations and how promptly you react. The better your reaction, the better you will be when facing another Genjutsu user and, by extension, the rest of the shinobi world." Kurenai explained, "A Genjutsu user's worst enemy is another Genjutsu user, as they will most likely be the most capable in dispelling your illusions and harming you. Many shinobi are apt in detecting and dispelling Genjutsu, but a Genjutsu master such as myself can usually place a Genjutsu without someone noticing unless they themselves are adept at Genjutsu." Naruto nodded and Kurenai stopped to let him absorb the information again. She watched him go up and down the tree again before starting again. Now, the second most dangerous type of shinobi to a Genjutsu user is usually a taijutsu expert, as they are close combat specialists and are the perfect counter to you being able to cast your illusion on your opponent. There are many different ways of stopping them from getting close to you. I use a distraction method. My clothes combined with my looks and a minor Genjutsu I can cast without hand signs or a time delay helps me to do this. Naruto looked at her with some adoration in his eyes as he thought of being able to do that. Kurenai's cheeks dusted a light pink again as Naruto whispered, "Amazing!" Kurenai's light pink turned into a cherry red, but Naruto had turned back to his training. She coughed and got her blush under control, wondering what was wrong with her, as she continued. "You, however, do not have that luxury," she stated, causing Naruto's face to turn into grim determination. "The easiest way to make you capable of escaping taijutsu masters would be to increase your speed," she said, drawing a raised eyebrow from Naruto as he descended the tree again, this time looking at her as he walked. "Your body is a clean slate right now with not much definition because of the neglect your previous teachers have given you. I am glad you told me about the food you have been eating." Naruto's eyes hardened slightly, but he still looked at Kurenai. Kurenai grimaced but continued, "This is actually a blessing, as instead of you becoming a strength type, we can make you into a running type which focuses on speed and would allow you to train your body to the point where you could escape just about anyone," she explained, which caused Naruto to scrunch his face up in thought. "So, I would be like Sasuke?" he asked. Kurenai shook her head. "No, Sasuke's taijutsu relies on him being fast, yes, but it also requires him to hit hard in order to deal damage when he dodges strikes. As a bonus, his Sharingan eyes allow him to map opponents' movements, which cuts down on how fast he has to be to dodge their strikes. I am going to train you into being a, for lack of a better term, speed demon. You will be so fast that you will be able to dodge people's attacks even without the Sharingan. Only those who train as hard as yourself will ever hope to be able to keep up with you," she explained as he looked up at her with wide eyes. Sasuke's style requires him to focus on speed while allowing for a decent amount of power to be worked into his training. Your training, on the other hand, will be specifically speed with very little strength. It will increase your speed farther than Sasuke can hope to achieve without following the same training. "Really?" he asked with slight amazement in his voice. Kurenai nodded. An errant thought came across Naruto's mind. Kurenai-sensei, how do you know how to train like this if you don't use it?" he asked curiously. Kurenai smiled. His observation skills seemed to already be put into use. She was rather sure he wouldn't have picked up on that before. "Just because I don't use that method doesn't mean I don't study it in case I meet another Genjutsu user who might make use of it. I wouldn't be much of a Genjutsu mistress if I didn't study my craft thoroughly, right?" she asked rhetorically as Naruto nodded in understanding. "How do we do that?" he asked. Kurenai shook her head as she noticed how low the sun was. They had spent a few hours talking since she had appeared and it was getting late. Tomorrow, Naruto. For now, I think it's time for dinner and then to head home, she said. Naruto nodded and jumped down from the tree he had been training on. Slightly winded, but nothing he couldn't handle. He grabbed his book and looked at Kurenai as he motioned for her to lead the way. She raised an eyebrow at him in question. He waited a few moments before speaking. "Aren't we heading home?" he asked. Kurenai opened her mouth to speak when how he had escorted her home those 2 nights 2 weeks ago passed through her mind, and she smiled at his chivalrous action. "Thank you, Naruto," she said as she began to walk away from the clearing, and Naruto fell into step next to her as they departed. Scene break. As the now master and student emerged from the training grounds area, Naruto began to think about Shikamaru's books and how much they had helped him. "I should really find a way to thank him. If it wasn't for those books, I would be worse off than I already am." Naruto took a sidelong glance at Kurenai. "Plus, I wouldn't have a teacher who was dedicated to helping me, and I wouldn't understand her either." He blushed a bit in embarrassment at how many words he had learned just from that small piece of paper Shikamaru had added to the books he gave him. He shook his head to rid himself of his blush and smiled slightly as he thought of how much time he had spent with Shikamaru, up to the point of making his own nickname for his closest friend his own age, calling him simply Shika, something Shikamaru had actually seemed to take to well. Naruto had been a little surprised when a lazy smile had been Shikamaru's response to his new name. He had expected him to find it troublesome, as the lazy Nara always called things, but Shikamaru had simply said to call him as he liked. Naruto had grinned happily as he used his new nickname. As they got close to the merchant district, Kurenai slowed and looked around, before heading towards a shop with a teacup sign in front of it. Naruto followed, a bit enclosed in his thoughts as he walked until he heard Kurenai opening the door with the light ringing of a bell signaling her opening of the door. Naruto looked up to see Kurenai walking into the store, one which he recognized pretty vividly as they had thrown him out Rator forcibly the last time he had attempted to eat there. He frowned but plastered a big smile on his face as he spoke to Kurenai from outside the little shop. "I'm not too hungry, Kurenai. I think I am going to head home," he said as he looked at her with squinted eyes. Kurenai's wine-red eyes appeared over her shoulder as she looked at him with a questioning glance. "You just spent the entire day training and you aren't hungry?" she asked, a hint of disbelief coloring her voice. Naruto nodded emphatically as he put his hands behind his head. "Well, I will see you tomorrow at the training ground again, sensei," he said as he went to turn around and leave. As he walked away, he heard the door close to the shop behind him, the bell ringing softly again as he trekked towards his home. His shoulders slumped slightly from not being able to eat with his friend when he sensed something next to him. "Then you will just have to escort me to my home so that we may eat there. I would welcome the company after my long mission," Kurenai said with a slight irritation in her voice at having forgotten about his condition. "That is, if you wish to stay," she stated. Naruto looked shocked for a few moments before he smiled and whispered, "Thank you," then spoke in a louder tone that Kurenai had an easier time catching. "I know a restaurant that would love to cook for you instead of making you cook after your long mission," he offered as he looked at her with a questioning glance. This time, Kurenai waved her hand in front of them as if to sweep something out of the way, the sign of him to lead the way to his choice of dinner for the night. Naruto's steps seemed to gain length as he strode towards the clan district of Konoha. Scene break. Naruto stepped up to his favorite Akimichi restaurant and was about to walk in when Kurenai grabbed his arm. "Naruto?" she said hesitantly. "Are you sure you want to eat here? I mean, it is rather expensive," she questioned. Naruto looked at her through squinted eyes. "No, it's not, Kurenai. Now, come on. I'm hungry," he said forcibly, completely forgetting how he had said he didn't want to eat earlier in light of being near his favorite restaurant. He turned around and walked to the door as Kurenai followed him, a wary look in her eye. Naruto opened the door and walked to the host's podium as Kurenai looked around at the restaurant. It had a little waiting room cut off from the rest of the restaurant. There were a myriad of chairs and padded benches sitting around the area, leaving a wide path from the door straight to the host's podium. The restaurant was made of an aged oak that gave the restaurant a relatively earthen yet foresty smell. The walls were not smooth, rather made up of stacked logs that gave it a wave-like ripple as it started at the ground and went to the high ceiling. The ceiling itself boasted a rather impressive chandelier that hung from the middle of the roof, lighting the entire room with a dim glow. The floor was a slab of concrete, unlike the rest of the room, that had exquisite rugs underneath any of the seating areas. Kurenai turned to look at the podium of the host and noticed that there was an akimichi standing at the podium, leading her to realize that Naruto had brought her to a clan-owned business. Naruto reached the host's podium and smiled up at the akimichi standing behind it. "Akitoshi-san, could I get my usual table, please?" Naruto asked, as he had become a regular customer since the akimichi allowed him into their restaurants. He had frequented this restaurant so much lately, along with eating almost as much as any akimichi, that the akimichi family owning it had reserved a table for him every night. He had been so grateful he had started to give them the same patronage he used to give Ichiraku's. Kurenai walked up next to Naruto as Akitoshi smiled down at the bright bundle that was Naruto. "Sure, Naruto. Just let me make sure it's ready." Akitoshi responded as he turned around to check the restaurant. The sounds of the inhabitants of the restaurant finally coming to Kurenai's ears as she arrived near the opening leading to the restaurant proper. Naruto looked up at her as Akitoshi turned back and his eyes widened at seeing Yuhi Kurenai, the proclaimed Ice Queen of Konoha, standing next to Naruto. Naruto was oblivious to the wide eyes Akitoshi gave him as Kurenai looked at him, and he seemed to get lost in her eyes. He could swear that he had never seen eyes so mesmerizingly beautiful before. A small blush came to his face as he looked at her, but he didn't look away until Akitoshi spoke again. "Right this way, Naruto, Yui-san." Naruto turned from Kurenai's mesmerizing eyes with a small sigh of relief at having been interrupted at staring at his friend and sensei. He didn't know why her eyes captured him so, but he knew that he enjoyed it whenever she had her eyes on him, probably more than he should, but he always enjoyed people watching him. It was just never to the degree that he seemed to enjoy Kurenai's red eyes taking in his every movement. He let out a small shiver for some reason unknown to him and followed Akitoshi as he signaled for him to go to his table. Kurenai had simply stared back at Naruto as she observed his reactions. Naruto completely missed the look in her eye as she noted his body had shivered. Naruto walked behind Akitoshi and Kurenai followed them as they made their way through the restaurant, the few akimichi in there looking at Naruto for a glance before returning to their food. As they settled into their table, in a corner where not much of the restaurant could see, Naruto turned to Kurenai and smiled at her as the two picked up their menus and began to look for their choice of food, neither feeling the need to speak just yet. After a few minutes of the both of them sitting there looking at the menu, Naruto laid his menu down and observed Kurenai as she looked at her menu. He took the moment to appreciate the beauty and maturity that she exuded as she sat opposite from him. Truly, no girl of his age could compare to the presence that Kurenai carried around her, even if Naruto was only barely aware of it. He decided to train a little bit as he closed his eyes and let his mind return back to its receptive state. He smiled slightly as he felt the table and the chair under him come into his vision as a slightly lighter version of gray than anything else. Seems his control was already improving, and started to stretch his mind outwards towards the restaurant. That was when he came into contact with Kurenai's chakra pool. Naruto gasped and his eyes widened in shock as he stared at Kurenai with a blush adorning his face, though the look of something in his eyes was not lust. This inexplicable feeling he had felt washed over him as his sensorability went haywire and he began to sense things from distances he hadn't reached yet, and he was sure he wouldn't reach until years of training. Kurenai's chakra pool was not as big as his own, but there seemed to be a bit of difference between her own chakra and Kakashi's. He would have compared it to Sasuke or Sakura's, but he hadn't really paid attention to them. Her chakra was a light blue in color. Something that he hadn't been able to make out with others was the color of their chakra. Even Kakashi was just another shade of bluish-gray to him. Usually, when he would sense a chakra, it would simply move along even if he prodded it with his sensor, then it would just ignore him, much like any actual person he had met. Kurenai's, however, seemed to react positively to his sensor ability even without him prodding it for feeling. It had seemed to grow and encompass his sensor while sending unknown feelings back to Naruto's already overloaded brain. His breath became a bit labored and he watched as Kurenai's eyes suddenly rose to meet his, her wine-red eyes narrowing slightly, a hint of concern gleaming in her eyes as she laid her menu down and went to speak. Oddly enough, right before Kurenai spoke, Naruto could swear he felt his Gigi's chakra somewhere nearby, but her concerned voice broke his train of thought and the feeling vanished as she asked, "Are you all right, Naruto? You look a little feverish." She leaned forward slightly, concern etched onto her face. Naruto just nodded dumbly and said, "I am fine, Kurenai," he said, cursing his stuttering. Kurenai's eyes narrowed and Naruto waved her off. "Just my sensor ability picking something up that was a bit unusual. I had never encountered it before and I don't really know what to make of it. Though I am new to this sensor thing, so it will probably happen again," he said as he scratched his head in slight embarrassment. Kurenai looked at him for a moment and a tense silence engulfed them until the waiter reappeared to take their orders. Kurenai's eyes did not leave Naruto's as she ordered her food and waited for Naruto to order his before speaking in a hard tone as the waiter retreated from the tense atmosphere. "Naruto, as your sensei, I would like to know if there is anything bothering you. It would be detrimental for our training if you were not to inform me if something is wrong." Naruto nodded his head. "That is as your sensei," she said before her voice softened. "As your friend." His eyes locked with her own mesmerizingly red eyes. "I would like to know the same thing in case I can help," she said softly. Naruto looked down for a moment before sighing and rubbing his hair again. "I was just trying to train my sensor while I was waiting for you to choose what food you wanted. Normally, everything is just a shade of gray. Even chakra pools are nothing more than differing shades of bluish gray." Here he looked at her. "But when I sensed your chakra, it was a vibrant light blue that almost seemed to. He trailed off as he searched for the right word to explain the feeling he had received. Kurenai waited with a question in her gaze. "Rub? Me as my sensor went haywire and your chakra almost burst into my vision." Whatever Kurenai had been expecting, it obviously wasn't that as she sat back in her chair, and her eyes seemed to unfocus from Naruto's bright blues while contemplating this new development. Naruto watched her curiously as her face remained blank during her contemplation. He didn't have the slightest idea of what was going on, but now that he had told Kurenai what had happened, minus the odd feelings he had received, he wanted to know her opinion. Naruto waited in silence for another 3 minutes before Kurenai's eyes refocused on him and she spoke. "I don't know anything about it, sorry Naruto," she said as Naruto's shoulders slumped very slightly. "I have a couple of theories, but the most likely is that it is something unique to the Uzumaki sensor bloodline and that you will have to figure it out on your own," she said with a frown marring her beautiful face. "But I don't think it is anything dangerous. I did feel my own chakra spike in response to your sensor, but I don't think anything is wrong. For now, let us assume that everything is fine and you are just careful next time you meditate, okay, Naruto?" she said. Naruto nodded and the meal was spent in quiet speech, Naruto and Kurenai speaking about anything that may come to mind whenever it came to them, until the bill arrived. Naruto put the money down for the bill and made to rise when Kurenai pulled out her own money. Naruto's eyebrow raised. "A man should pay for the food. Gigi told me that," Naruto said as he looked at Kurenai's money. Kurenai smiled and said, "That is, indeed, usually the case, Naruto, but this meal was to commemorate you becoming my student. I will pay for today. If we go out to eat together again, you will pay." Naruto was about to argue that Gigi had said that the man should always pay when a sweet glare from Kurenai made its way towards his face, something he recognized from Yoshino giving to her husband. He froze slightly and simply nodded his head as he retrieved his money and Kurenai laid down her own. The glare went away and a small giggle escaped her lips before she stood and the two left the restaurant. Naruto walked Kurenai to her apartment building again, and the two stood at the entrance for a few moments before Naruto spoke. "Arigato for training me, Kurenai. See you tomorrow, sensei," he said as he turned around after having bowed to her while smiling happily and began to walk away. Kurenai watched him go and a hint of a smile appeared on her face before turning around and heading into her complex.